many of you have a sort or any type of insurance plan with you? Right? Health insurance, car insurance, or medical insurance, anything, right? So let's talk about code, right? So the first thing when we opt for an insurance plan, what comes to our mind? So what benefits will it cover, right? What benefits will our insurance plan cover? But when it comes to code, then do we think in the same way with our test plan? Like what benefits will it cover? Will it cover the main part of our application? That is the code itself. So will it cover that or not? Okay? So we'll be speaking about these things in detail. So the agenda for today is, so we'll be having an introduction. So assuming people are from different levels of expertise and different backgrounds, right? So we'll talk about what is code coverage, what is the need for it, why do we do code coverage. Then we'll take as an example Istanbul, that is the tool for code coverage in JS, for JS applications, and it is written in JS too. Then components of Istanbul, and so components will be the same for every instrumentation tool, whatever it is used for code coverage, right? Then using Istanbul for JS apps. So we are taking Istanbul for JS apps, but the process is the same for every kind of app. Maybe it can be Python app or C++ or any app written in any language. The process remains the same. Then Istanbul report, and similar reports are obtained for other kinds of tools as well. Then we'll have a quick demo, because after that we are going to have one, so we'll make it quick, right? And then in the future, so some things we are not able to achieve, so we'll leave it to you. So if some of you might be interested in achieving those, so we can have contributions from that.
To set the content, basically you might have worked with lots of code coverage tools and you have seen the code coverage. But there are generally the common language that we have Java. We have a couple of tools, couple of like SonarQ, Coco. The only thing that in the JavaScript-based application is very tough to calculate the code coverage. And if you talk about the code coverage is the only source of truth for being an automation, being a unit test case. So in current situation in market, so JavaScript-based code coverage is tough to calculate because the nature of JavaScript, like there are lots of JavaScript frameworks like Vue.js, Node.js, React.js. So Istanbul is a code coverage tool which came into the market and it's solving lots of problems from the testing point of view, from automation point of view. So if you integrate the Istanbul in your normal automation suite, so you can have your source of truth and you can say that how much code coverage your test script is. So this topic is more focused on the JavaScript based applications, be it in Vue.js, be it in React.js or Node.js.
So coming to the introduction, so this is a part that I won't do myself. I need people who will talk, who can just quickly tell me maybe one-liners about unit testing. So anyone, what do you understand by unit testing? Anyone?
The code which we wrote is working is accordingly what it's supposed to run.
Right.
Smallest piece of.
So what are units?
The smallest piece.
Smallest piece of
Okay. Right. So, and about integration testing.
How those walls interact with.
So how different units interact with each other, testing at that level, right? Then comes the system testing. So another level above integration, so where all modules are integrated together, and we treat the entire system as a black box. We don't know how things are working in there, but we know what output we'll get. We just know the input, the black box, and the output, right? Then the testing techniques. So what is white box testing? Someone from this way? Anyone in fact. People are aware about it, right? I am assuming.
Did you ask what is testing?
White.
Yes, about white box testing. So just a one-liner or anything? No?
Go to the code and check
right, about the code. So you like you dive into the code to check how it works and whether it's working according to your requirements or not, right? Then comes the black box testing. So it's like synonymous to system testing. So you consider it as a black box, you don't know the code inside. And even you don't know the language in which it is written, what are tools and technologies it is implemented. Sorry?
You just give the inputs and check out.
Exactly. You just give the inputs and check it out. Right? So this sets the stage to move ahead for code coverage. So what exactly is code coverage? So just in a one-liner, it is a measurement of code when you run your tests, how much of your source code is actually exercised or executed or touched by your code. Right? That's simple it is. So you just need to know, or this is to report how much source code is actually covered when you run your tests. So tests can target different levels, right? So they can be unit or integration tests. So I would call the unit and integration tests as white box tests. Would that be fine? That'd be okay, right? And the system and functional tests as black box tests. Okay? So for this session, we are not focusing on the unit integration tests, but on the functional tests. So through your functional tests, when you consider your entire system as a black box, then how can you obtain code coverage at a functional level, right? Okay, so before moving on to the next slide, need for code coverage. So how many of you know, or in how many organizations developers do write unit tests? So can you please raise your hand? Not much. So in other organizations, developers are not even writing unit tests, so that is bad. So test-driven development should be adopted, right? So that is the importance of unit tests. That at least from the developer side, it is an assurance that the code is covered. From my side, I have tested the individual units; they are working fine. I'm sure about that. You check the entire system as a whole, right? Okay. So what is the need of code coverage? So does this strike anything in your mind? So it's a signboard, but it's saying sign not in use. So is it required? Is it even required over here? No, right? So similar resemblance with your code. So if your source code contains some file or some code snippet that's not getting executed at all in any scenario, there will not be any scenario. So that is unreachable code, right? That is just maybe introducing technical debt that you want to remove. Why do you even want to deploy that code onto the server? It would just increase the space, right? So one is this thing. Then secondly, even if you get good code coverage, can you be sure? So the second step is, once you have the code coverage, that we will be showing in the demo, right? But once you have the code coverage, so are you okay if you get 87.5 code coverage like this, and your product goes to the production like this? So there are 8 set of tires, I assume, so 7 set of tires are working fine, but 1 set is not working fine. But you have a whopping 87.5 code coverage. So according to me, that's good. But yes, the report that I get after obtaining code coverage, I need to analyze that. Whether all my features are touched, say average 50% or 60%, every feature I have tested or not. Okay? So that needs to be taken care of. So overall, the need of code coverage, apart from this, if anybody feels like they can let me know. So it provides feedback on the quality of test cases, right? So whether your test cases are covering portions of your code or not. So you need to be sure about that, right? So you might be having 1,000 test cases, but they are not covering every feature of your system or the application under test. So there has to be a certain quality, and through code coverage you can like measure the quality. So that is a metric for measuring the quality of test cases. Second thing is it validates the intent of the tester. So as we say here, it's like the character certificate of the tester. So whether he's good in his intent to automate the test cases or not. So maybe someone would say that you have to automate 10 test cases in this week, but that's not correct output. I would say keep get your code coverage increased to till 50%. You automate till that level, not like 10 test cases or 20 test cases. That would not be a correct measurement of how much code got covered. Did you touch every feature or not? You won't know just by the number of test cases. So it's better to increase the code coverage to a level that suffices your requirements. So the third thing is backtracking. As I said, so from the report you can do backtracking, so you can know what features you didn't touch while executing your tests, right? Then fourth is measuring progress. That is obviously, so at the first day you had only 10% code coverage because you automated 5 test cases, but we are not seeing the number of test cases, we are seeing how much percentage of code coverage actually increases. So like on the first day you had 10%, then maybe after a week you reach to 40%, so that gives a level of progress to me that yes, I'm increasing the code coverage, so everyone knows yes, I am automating. Okay. So coming to our tool Istanbul, so that is for JS apps. But moving forward also, don't assume that this is JS specific. This applies on every language, okay? So it's just the theory part, and the slides can correspond to the entire code coverage theory and the basics. It's not just specific to JS. And also, let me mention that we are not focusing on the unit test cases. We are focusing on the functional part. Okay? So it's a code coverage tool for JS applications, and it provides you with different metrics, that is statement coverage, the line coverage, the function coverage, and the branch coverage. So for this Istanbul report, so let me mention that so statement coverage is, a statement is anything that ends with a semicolon, and number of statements can be within a line. So that is the difference between statement and the line. Function, as we all know, and branch is any conditional. Okay? So it supports all JS coverage use cases, including unit tests, server-side function tests, and browser tests. So at this point, so it's pretty easy to find out and obtain your code coverage through unit tests. I think through any tool, Istanbul or for any language, for any other tool that is available in the market. So there's enormous documentation. For Istanbul, it is okay. But for functional tests, when we were going through this phase of how we can obtain functional code coverage, so we didn't find any much documentation on the web for this. So we had to, so there were steps mentioned, but there was no sample, maybe sample steps available. So that is why we wanted to share this process using the sample and dummy app involved. So how does Istanbul work? And when I say how does Istanbul work, I actually mean any code coverage tool. How does it work? So it will have these 3 main components. So one is the language parser. So read it as a language, not just as JS. Okay. So the first will be the language parser. Then this instrumentation process will happen, and then finally the code in the native language code will be generated again. So the input to any code coverage tool is the source code. So the first component over here in case of Istanbul is ES Prima. So ES Prima is nothing but JS parser. So JS is based on ECMS script, that is a language standard. So JavaScript is a language that implements that standard. Right? So ES in short for ECMS script. Right? So what it does is, this has the code, all the syntax, then ES Prima, it understands the code, it passes it and converts it into an abstract syntax tree, what it is called. So it actually breaks the code and into a syntax tree. Right? Then this is the Istanbul's task to do, to actually inject a coverage variable into that syntax. So that coverage variable is nothing but a map that stores coverage information for each of the JS files. right? So because we need something to sit upon the code and look over it, whether this line was touched, whether this branch was touched, whether this statement was touched or not. Right? Then after this coverage variable is injected for each line and all, then the code is generated back. So first we had the code, then we had the syntax, then syntax along with the instrumentation code, then the code is generated back again. So it becomes the same JS program. So the business logic is not touched. We haven't changed that. We have just wrapped it with our instrumentation coverage variable. So nothing in the original code has changed. So the implementation will remain the same. And finally, we get the instrumented source code. So now we are not dealing with this for code coverage. We have to deal with that, the instrumented source code. So don't assume that on the production your site is deployed and you can find out code coverage for that. You cannot. You have to have not the source code but the instrumented source code deployed somewhere. Then you have to run your tests on that and then you can obtain code coverage. Okay. So using Istanbul for JS apps. So again, I think these will be generic steps, right? So this is on the front end what we want to do, right? So we first instrument the code. So there's some command, so we'll be demonstrating it. So there's some command, you instrument the code. What does that code do? It injects a global coverage variable. And after you have executed your test, obviously you want to obtain the data from that coverage variable, right? So you export that coverage data in the form of a JSON and you keep it in one or multiple files, right? So and those JSON files are nothing but the entire code coverage statistics. And then finally, a command will run on that and you will obtain a consolidated report in the form of HTML or something like that, where you have all the aggregated report for each of the files. Okay? Right, so before actually starting with this, so I want to mention that this is not just for code coverage through your automation tests. Right, you can also execute your manual tests on this. So maybe if you are having a regression test suite at the end of the sprint, so you can maybe yourself or ask the developer to deploy an instrumented source code over the server. Then you execute your regression test plan on that manually through the URL, and then you can get a code coverage report also as an add-on metric that can help you to actually uncover any code you haven't touched. So maybe you can increase the quality of your test cases or add up more test cases that will touch that code or features. Okay. So this is a sample of the Istanbul report that you get, which will be displayed when we after do the demo, right? So here, so you have the 4 kinds of metrics you get: statements, branches, functions, and lines. So these are the file-wise metrics you can see. Again, for every file you have the statements, branches, functions, and lines. So here you can see, right? So this is almost fully covered, all the green ones. So using color codes, you know. So obviously, if I see this report, I'll focus on these things. These are not covered much. So I'll think of test cases that cover these parts, right? Okay. So this is one of the files. So you can actually click on each of the folders, then go within and go to each file. So one of these files is this. So you know, Istanbul tells you, so this statement is not covered. So you hover over it, it will tell you this statement isn't covered. Okay, and this part was covered once or 1x, 2x based on that. Okay. So coming to the demo part. So the first thing, so this is a UI demo, and at the bottom of it you can see the blog where all this is mentioned. Okay, so I have written some steps and taken some screenshots. So the first thing would be to either inject some code into the source code that will take care of exporting my coverage object time to time. Right, so that is the one thing. Okay, the top one. So either you can inject something into your code that will post my coverage object to somewhere else. So what here it is happening is, So I found a file in my source that has the browser windows context, right? Where I handle my browser window. So through that, I say that whenever my window is unloaded, that is either it is refreshed or it is quit. So I want the coverage object to be sent to a separate server. So that will process it further, right? Because the coverage object is in my session storage of the browser. For UI, this is a challenge. So you don't have it in the tools memory. You do not have it in the Istanbul's memory. You have to fetch that from the browser storage. So that is what it is. So before the browser window unloads, you have to make sure that you capture that coverage object and send to the server for further processing. And this server is doing nothing but at this path, okay, at this path it is creating a JSON file that with the contents of this coverage, which we later process through the report command. Or if you have your automation script, right, this is for your manual tests. Obviously, if you have manual tests, then you cannot, like in your script, you cannot do this. So for manual tests, you can do this step. For automation tests, you can, like before you are doing driver.close or driver.quit, before that you can have a statement like this using JavaScript executor, right, which will return that window.coverage object. Okay. Coverage, that window.coverage. So coverage is the default global variable for coverage variable that we spoke about, the global coverage variable. Okay. So before these steps, you obviously have the project on your machine. You install your project dependencies using npm install, that is for JS code, for any other that is tool specific and language specific. Then you install the Istanbul package, npm install Istanbul. And finally, this step is different. Okay. So this step is different. So before you are actually creating the build for testing, you instrument it. So what this command is doing is, it is instrumenting all the files in the root directory. Okay? So Istanbul is instrumenting the root directory and like instrumenting them and keeping them in the inst folder. So I've just named it inst. Okay? So within the inst folder, you have all your JS files instrumented. Okay? This complete copy attribute, what it does is, so Istanbul only instruments JS files, obviously. So you might be having HTML files or CSS files and other non-JS files. But obviously when you will be deploying to the server, you also want those to come up. So this complete copy will make sure that the files which are not instrumented, they are copied as it is into the inst folder. So the HTML files and CSS files, they will also be available in your inst folder, so that from within the inst folder, you can then deploy your server and launch your application. Then comes the ES module. So this is an attribute which will be used optionally. Obviously, this is also optional, but ES modules will be used when your Java JS code uses the import-export syntax. That is, I think, was introduced with ES6 standard or ECMS script 6 standard. That was in 2015. So for code that was written before that or which wasn't changed according to the latest standard, you can skip this part, ES modules. Okay, and so this was the only separate command we executed, right? And after that, we can just go into this inst folder, so we don't actually need anything from the root folder now. Okay, so we go into this inst folder and then run our project specific build command. So this is a project specific command. So you might be having different commands, different build commands for your projects. Okay, and then this finally builds your app, and then I'll just show you manually how you get the coverage object from the browser. So I already ran those instrument commands, right? And I have this exe over here, and this is a bundled app. So this is containing the JS files, but with the instrumented code. Okay. So with this, this is a dummy app, so I actually need to run something this for project specific. So this is a, am I audible otherwise?
Yes.
Okay. So this is a desktop app. Okay, so I'll just open the developer tools and can show you how I can get this. So this is the window.coverage object. So this, right, so this is the variable name of the global coverage. Okay. So I can access this.
So basically, this is dummy app. Have you worked on any? Have you seen the Slack?
Yes, we are using.
The Slack has been built on Electron, and this app was also built on Electron. On top of Vue.js. So how to calculate the code coverage of at least the application which has been built on Electron technology. So Electron, this has been built on Electron. So in this is developer options has been made available in the automation. Generally, in such application, developer options are not available. Right. It's a dummy app that is showing where developer options are available. So as these are bundled, when your suite burn, so how you will calculate the code coverage? How will you do instrument? There is a object is record is basically object which will instrument any bundle application while developer.
Okay, so what that instrumentation process did was expose this coverage variable into the browser storage so I can access this. Through automation, what I would want is like when my tests are running, I want to access this and process this later on to create my report and all, consolidated report. But just for manual purposes right now to explain the concept, so what I can do is, so I can get a string of the entire map. So this will give me an overall report. So what I can do is just copy it like this. Okay. Okay, so I'll just copy the entire JSON. I'll keep it somewhere. So I already had this, so I'll just delete it. So this is a folder I just made right now, a coverage folder. I'll create a new file. Right, I'll copy all that string, the JSON string, and keep it over here. So now when I run the report command of Istanbul, it will process this JSON file and convert it into an HTML format. So the command is Istanbul report, right? So I'm not giving any arguments, specific arguments as to where my coverage JSON files are located, because it assumes that your coverage files are in the coverage folder of your root location, which already is. Okay. So I'll just type Istanbul report, and it's done. Okay. So two new additional things are created: lcov.info and lcov report. So are you people aware of the lcov format of the report? No? So the Istanbul report that we showed, like this. So this is a graphical front end for reporting code coverage statistics. So this kind of graphical front end is called lcov. Okay. So for UI side, we have got the code coverage, and we can probably go within this and check how much of the code was covered. File and then handle second. So handle second is when you pass on the termination command to this process, then only it will terminate. Otherwise what happens is, if you remove this handle second, it will start and it will stop. That's it. It won't wait for a exit command from the user side. Okay, and we want the process to be running till we are executing our tests. So application is now deployed, so I'll just do a quick demo. So this is again a dummy app. So I'll just run the Istanbul command, Istanbul cover, and so for this application, the entry point file is at the root location that is named index.js, right? And I will write handle second. So this will start my application. So I can check if it is deployed. It's still processing. Okay. So if I refresh now, so the Swagger document is up, so my application is up. So what can I do? What I can do is I can just open any API. I can just send a request to it. So I'll just send any request, even if it is invalid, it will go through some code and give me the code coverage statistics, right? Okay. So it did do something, it traversed through some code, right? So what I will do now is I'll close the server. I'll send it a SIGINT command which will terminate this. Okay, so it also gives me a coverage summary on my command line, and then by default there is a coverage folder created at my root location as well, similar to UI, right? So again, I go to coverage and to LCOV report, and again the same kind of LCOV report I have over here as well. So for API it is still straightforward. For UI side you have to do some code changes maybe on the JS side or in your automation tests. Are not able to achieve was okay. So the first thing was resolving issues in instrumentation with some ES6 features. So there is a spread operator which is actually 3 dots. So this is an operator used with React.js or something. So Istanbul is not able to pass files containing such operators. So it does not pass this file, it copies it as it is into the inst folder or into the inst folder. This is for the UI side. Okay, and then another disadvantage till now that we haven't been able to do is the inclusion of untouched files in coverage data. So for example, you have 4 files. Your test went through only 3 files. It didn't even knew about the existence of the 4th file at all. So actually the report will only consider those 3 files in totality. It won't even consider the 4th file. So all those percentages that it is giving, if any file is not touched at all, it won't even consider that in the entire percentage of it. So we still need to find out how we can do that so that it reports the correct statistics. Right, so some references. So these are some other tools for code coverage in other languages. So for C# we have ESPerf CMD, for PHP we have Spike PHP coverage, and for Python we have coverage.py. So that's it. Any questions, guys?
Is there any structural changes when the code gets converted into instrumental?
No, not at all.
It's just like
It's just like a wrapper over it.
okay.
Nothing at all. Nothing.
And both of these like run in the same context, Istanbul and your application. So that
Sorry, I didn't get
both of these, Istanbul and your application, runs in the same context. I'm assuming.
it. Yes, yes,
That's
it does. Right. Any more questions?
And when we have a bigger application, like we see, it was a small application. It
Right.
gives us a file of around 121 KB. So
Right.
when we have a bigger application, like thousands of files, so
It will still be, if you have coverage, whether you don't have coverage or, so the initial file would be of that same very length. But yes, if you have more files, yes, it will be of more size. Because from the initial, from the initial stage itself, it gets all the files into that coverage object.
Yeah.
Right.
So do we have any option to switch off that specific thing of like explaining if this line of code are covered or not, something like that? We just show the aggregated result. So do we have these kind of features as well?
For this, like for the report you are saying?
Yeah, we just show we just show only the stats, like
Right.
80% is covered. When
Right,
we don't show the like detailed reports.
So I don't think Istanbul provides anything for that, but yes, you can build upon these, like the index.html, that was the report of Istanbul. So you can fetch those statistics and report in your custom reports.
Actually, I was just thinking about that size. It's very long. It's huge. 121 KB is also very huge.
Yes, actually. Can't help it. Any more questions, guys? I am assuming no.
Can I just add one thing?
Yeah, sure.
I'm at the mic. Let's see. Where's the switch? Hello? 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 Yeah. One thing I want to add. Hello? Is it working? Just went out. Hello?
You're audible, Aaron.
Emmett? Okay. So one thing to add about coverage. So this is an example from something we did at Monotype. So we had a test system in place for one of our embedded products, and it allowed us to create a lot of tests very quickly, and we were able to measure coverage of those tests, which was great. The thing is, the way that testing worked, it generated files that we use as gold masters, to think about it, to compare against. So we think of it as a regression test for the coverage. You have to validate those, obviously. So to validate those, if you have a large number of those files, that can take a long time to verify those, because you can't verify those automatically. You have to inspect them, right, in some manual way. So what we found out was we generated a lot of tests because we were trying to get a feature out really quickly. We realized we had great coverage, but we had a problem in that we had so many output files that we would have to verify. If anything ever went wrong, it would be prohibitive to actually review the data that we had. So one of the guys on my team went through and with coverage analysis was able to go through and take what ended up being 200 gig of data and ended up with the same coverage by reducing that file size down to 2 gig of data, which was manageable from the number of files we needed to look at, with the same exact coverage at the line level. So that's the value of coverage you can do. So if you have systems that you already have in place and you have a lot of tests, you can measure those tests, but the other thing you need to do is how effective are your tests, right? Are you covering the same thing again and again and again? So don't forget that part of coverage. It's great to look at it and see what you have, but also use it as a way to do an assessment of the quality of the test that you have. So keep that in mind as you're looking at it and using coverage. It's had has a lot of great benefits. It's a very objective way to look at what you're testing. So use this as a way in your process. Development can use it in their unit test process as well. They can figure out how they're really covering their test. So just keep that in mind as you're looking at this. And if you have older code and you have a lot of these tests and you say, we're never going to touch that product again, you can still run that coverage report on that. And it'll tell you how good you're covering. And you may be able to reduce your effort on those test suites where sometimes you have to do manual verification of the output or visual inspection in some way, shape, or form. So keep that in mind.
Nikunj, one more question. So do we store this coverage variable at server side?
We store them in the JSON files that we create.
So I will try to give an example. I'm working on testing activity from my machine. I'm using a client like Google Chrome. Latika is also working on the same activity. She's also using some browser, but she's using different system. So the coverage variable that we have, it's a global variable. So the value will be the values will be different for both of us, or will it be same?
The statistics in the coverage variable will be different, but when they are aggregated, there is a logic, so it won't overlap. It will show you the exact statistics.
Well, sorry, I will just try to clear this question. So let's suppose we are working on home page, and there is some XYZ page. I'm working on home page. So I have covered the code of home page in my testing. She has covered XYZ page and the code of that. So when I fetch the coverage variable, so will I get the code coverage for that XYZ page as well?
No. That is in your browser.
So it's client specific.
Yeah, exactly. So that is a global variable, but for your entire code. But
okay. But now if we run our test cases, automation test cases in different machines, okay, so in that case, how are we going to get the code coverage? It will become difficult because in the parallel test cases, if we're running a test cases on only two machines, then one will show like we have 40% of the disk coverage, other will show like we have 60%.
But then you are going to consolidate it, right?
So you'll like copy paste the.
No, but you will have that coverage object in your browser. So you are talking about the UI test cases.
Yeah, so in that case we have two different machines, I'm saying. We don't have one
Yeah,
machine.
but on those machines the browser will be there.
Yeah.
In the browser the coverage variables will be there. So those are separate because the browser is different. But when you fetch the data from that browser, it will be stored in some coverage JSON files, right? You have to process them together. Obviously,
so we need to copy paste it in one file.
Yeah, that can be automated, right? So we have.
But in case of we have multiple machines, like so it is
So
a
ultimately,
job to done then.
so I showed you one code,
Even
right?
even Istanbul is like working in the same context as of application. Why don't we have something at server side, so that we have the same data available to everyone?
For APIs, we have something like that. So we did the same thing for our REST-based APIs. So hit it from anywhere, that is being handled at the server end. And whenever you hit something, an entry gets added to a JSON, and at the end, there is an HTML that gets generated. So for APIs, something like that is in place, but for GUIs, it is browser-centric.
It does. But
But still,
yes, we
still a
do.
surprising
So the
fact.
place
only
where we
actually.
store the file, is it like the something which we can modify, or is it like the fixed that it's going to store that file in
The JSON files.
Yeah.
So those will be as it is from the browser.
But
You just,
can it be configured to some location? Like I can put it
Yes.
on file shared repository?
so we did that through a server, right? So we are actually sending this coverage object to this server.
I think this will answer his question, right? Like if we configure this to some place folder
To
where
a
it is
central
configured to all,
repository, right? So this will send all the coverage JSON files to this server and store at this path
Yeah, so
Right.
that actually
within
solves
that
it.
project.
So like
Then-
in our case, we have let's say coverage.monotype.com. It's a central
Exactly.
service for coverage thing. All coverage object JSON has been dumped into that server, and then the index
Oh, then
HTML has been
Automatically solves the problem.
But it sounds like a kind of workaround to me.
But
Sounds
that
like
is-
a workaround because the permanent solution can be the one which was implemented in API part. Like everything is at the
that is a
server
bit
side.
of challenge with UI side, right? Because it's on the browser side, on the client side.
Because in case of
So in
desktop applications, so if you ask me that the application that we have taken as a demo, it's a more or less, though it's a web-based, but still it's a desktop. It has been installed in your machine. So when we are running in, let's say in a CD process or a CI store, so it is only on one machine. Till the time we have, let's say, on you have Selenium grade or some sort of things. So we have, it's a standalone application bundled in your operating system. So there are a couple of more challenges in the UI stuff because it's a more or less machine level or your browser-centric as architecture. API is web-based. It's a endpoint. It's a URL where it can be accessed from any network by a network host. Especially for desktop application, it's a challenge. That's why this we more focused on this the UI stuff because even if you're running on your Jenkins machine, you have to install this at that desktop application and then you have to run your suite. So we just instrumenting that application on Jenkins machine only, and only one suite is calculating all your counts, not from the multiple machine or multiple suites.
And just a thought, I mean, when you are running your code coverage Jenkins job, maybe have the parallel equal to false, and you might not need code coverage on a daily basis, maybe on a weekly basis. And when your test run or the usual test run, have them run as parallel, and then if you want to just calculate the code coverage, have it on single machine. Just, I mean, again, work around.
One thing I just want to add, so on applications, some tools allow you to do this merge capability. I don't know if Istanbul will allow that with these. I don't know the output of Istanbul particularly, but I know other applications or other coverage tools I've used have a merge capability built into them. I don't think Istanbul has that built into it because I don't think they're thinking about that, right, in the way they develop their code. So that's something that, depending on what the output of that data is, there may be a way to automatically merge that data together. So even if you run them on parallel machines, you can get a single coverage report because I think you said that's all that just XML output from JSON output. So it's just JSON output. Maybe there's a way that stuff can all be merged together easily.
IBM coverage tools which are like paid one, which are being used for the C++ and the C
Right.
application. So
Right.
there we can use this merge thing.
Yes.
And they give you the integrated results.
Right.
We use that.
So this is one disadvantage because this is client side and API is server side.
Right, let's proceed for lunch because and if any other questions are there, maybe we can take them offline.
So lunch will be served at third floor. We have to move to third floor for the lunch. After lunch, we'll have a session on mobile app automation, and there will be a hands-on workshop as well. So we'll be back in 30 minutes.